Welcome everybody to the next BU podcast. So today my guest on the show is Andrew Stone, the lead developer of Bitcoin Unlimited. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So I think what we're going to cover today is mostly around what the current situation is in Bitcoin Cash. As always, there's a big drama going on, but I think it's good to get BU's and Andrew's perspective on the situation and how he sees, how Bitcoin Cash can move forward and what BU's role is in doing that. So yeah, I mean, maybe if you can give maybe a bit of a background on how, maybe if you give a summary of the current situation with regards to the maybe even the difficulty adjustment algorithm, because that was obviously very recently happened, and then the new IFP 2.0.
Sure. Okay. So, I think people who are following it realize that Jonathan Tuman did a lot of work on a difficulty algorithm that, is very much informed by prior work in other altcoins. And he did a lot of simulations, a tremendous amount of effort to create this thing. And it's at the point where people kind of have a pretty good belief that that it's going to work, right? When the original DAA came out, for example, I was asked to try and help resolve some of the conflict there, right? And I spent like 2 days analyzing the algorithms in the simulator, and I very quickly found the attacks in the DAA that are being used against it today. So this, once bitten, twice shy, right? So Tuman did a lot of very valuable work to sort of prove that this sort of attack is going to be very difficult to accomplish, right? And limited in scope. That train was well down the track when ABC kind of took that algorithm, that core algorithm, added some additional features to it and significant additional complexity, and then issued it under a new name called Grassberg and said this is the way it's going to be. And more is not always better if the more is not sort of well tested and fully analyzed. And of course, the community had no opportunity to do that, right? So that's kind of the, I don't know, all the way up to the mid game, right? And so then a variety of meetings were held. The community members said to ABC, well, we want to stick with this assert algorithm due to its strengths. And so, that's what we're going to do. And then Amari responded by saying, fine, but the IFP, which is, I'm going to show my bias when I simply say it is effectively a political tax, right, to start looting BCH of value, okay? So he has recreated the specter of the IFP, and the community is now arguing and fighting over these issues.
Well, I find it, yeah, I mean, I find it's kind of interesting because obviously you say the community is arguing and fighting, but there seems to be very, very, very few people in support of the IFP. I mean, even less than there was the first time.
Things have changed dramatically, you're right. And the internet trolls who were sort of in favor of the IFP from a knee-jerk perspective, right? The people you could always count on to jump into Reddit and give, ABC a fist pump seem to be silent in this go around. But I mean, this is just my qualitative assessment.
Right. I mean, even for the first IFP, it was, included in the list of whitelisted addresses were BCHD were included. I think Electron Cash, and I'm trying to remember who. There was obviously this unspecified organization that was also going to receive funding. And maybe one more. I can't remember off the top of my head.
One thing that is interesting from a sort of sociological perspective, when you think about that, is where the money goes. Look at the steps that the money took, right? As each individual IFP proposal came out, and it went from like a Hong Kong company to which was kind of controlled by miners, right? To like a set of addresses controlled by Omari and certain friends or people with a lot of pull, and now it's just one address. Presumably it's Omari's address, right? So that transition, I think, pretty clearly indicates what the purpose of the IFP has always been.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I personally think that the argument that it came from the miners is probably unlikely to be true, given, like you said, that process, that walk towards what the actual outcome was.
Yeah, I mean, I think John Old did say that he was the one who actually put pen to paper and wrote it, right? So I think it's sort of well known at this point that it was an ABC initiative that was sort of handed to the miners to present, right? And that is why they backed away from it very rapidly once it became clear that the Western community was completely dead set against it.
Right. I mean, so that kind of brings us to today, then, really.
Yes.
That's where we are. I mean, to point out to everyone who doesn't know, I mean, you kind of should know right now, but essentially every single development team, other than Bitcoin, like BCH development team, other than Bitcoin ABC, is implementing a cert. That's yes. Correct, right? So,
yep.
if ABC does continue to implement the IFP, there will either be a split, or people, if no miners run ABC, then there will be no split, but ABC will just be not accepted by the network. They will essentially, from that point, be nothing, a software development team that nobody's using.
Right, exactly. And from Bitcoin Unlimited's perspective, we were a strong, anti-IFP voice right from the beginning. And so, we, like the community, the members, have passed a BUIP, rejecting the IFP at all costs. Like, we will fork away from any IFP coin. As an ideological stance against, looting. So from my perspective, there's no sort of semantic difference between this IFP and the previous one. So that BUIP, remains valid. So, BU is not willing or capable of compromising in this situation. We are not going with the IFP. End of discussion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if anything, I think it would gather more support now if a similar proposal was raised. Going by what I've seen from them, it was almost a unanimous agreement in that.
It was then, and I think you're right. It would be the same, right? Mm-hmm. If the vote happened now.
Right. So in terms of specifics, because obviously you're the lead developer of Bitcoin Unlimited, where do you feel, like, in terms of the software for the Bitcoin Unlimited client, where would you say how would you implement the current situation with regards to a cert and a fork or not a fork? How strict is it going to be?
That's a good question. So we're definitely obviously going to implement a cert, and Greg Griffith is working on that right now in BU. And then in terms of the IFP, just like in the last situation, I don't necessarily feel like code needs or even should be added to the blockchain, right? If someone writes code that says that blacklists an address, that would create a very bad precedent, right? Hey guys, blacklisting addresses is possible, right? And I don't necessarily think that it's actually needed. I think that in some. So first of all, it seems like the world is against the IFP, right? So just like the previous time, I think that with, vigilance and talking to miners, um, this will not happen. But if for some reason it did happen, um, there are options that we can use to create a fork at that time. Uh, like invalidate block is a RPC call, which will simply, uh, you know, administratively declare a fork, the IFP fork, not non-valid, right? And so then we would go off on our own fork with the rest of the community, right? Other options would be to essentially retroactively invalidate blocks. So let's say, a few hours or a half a day passes before we realize that IFP is viable. Then, we simply effectively invalidate the block 6 hours ago, the first IFP block, right? And so then we kind of rewind time a little bit and continue from that point, right? You could do that, you can do that 5 years after the IFP. Not that you would, right?
No,
But what
right.
I'm trying to say is there's nothing that stops you from kind of rewinding like blockchain time a little bit to fork off at the appropriate point, even if it's a bit in the past. And so I think that it's important, perhaps for people to realize, hey, we're not. If the IFP happens to happen and we haven't written code to block it, it's not because we're not prepared, right? It's because that was a choice that we made for the reasons that I just was just discussing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's more philosophical reasons in that
Exactly.
you would rather not blacklist. I mean, maybe it's worth taking a step back to even explain why there could be an argument for blacklisting an address, which is that, so as far as I'm aware, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is true for BU, Bitcoin Unlimited software, and true for BCH, and I assume probably for BCHD and the other full node softwares, that should we say, if the IFP is activated, the only rule that's changing is that miners have to send a percentage of their reward to a specific address. So
Right.
it's effectively a soft fork. But if every block being produced is just simply produced by BCHN or BU or any other node, then it's essentially like the IFP was ignored, kind of de facto. Like the BCHN and BU, they just ignore the fact that IFP even exists, and it only exists if a majority of the BCH network hash power follows ABC. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in the case, if the majority of the hash power is mining IFP blocks and ignoring non-IFP blocks, then we have a problem because our nodes, the ones that are tolerant of both IFP blocks and non-IFP blocks, right, will continually be reorganized and move on to the majority chain of IFP blocks, right? So that's like not a viable scenario, right? Now, what's also fascinating to me, at least, is the opposite scenario, where if IFP has a minority of the hash power, then actually it's a it actually it's a little bit like a block withholding attack, right, against them, because what happens is they are willfully ignoring the majority chain, right, and taking their hash power away from it. So it's like the majority blocks are being withheld from the ABC clients, right? And so they are constantly being forced to reorganize. Sorry, assuming that they say, okay, periodically we're gonna give up on our IFP chain and pop back to the main BCH chain and attempt to fork off IFP again, right? So if they're sort of continually attempting to create like a majority IFP fork, then they're losing money like mad due to all the reorganizations that they're subjected to, right? The other option, of course, is they just fork off on a minority chain and just keep going in their own direction, right? So those are kind of the options. So yeah, so the first option is what worries people, where the non-IFP chain is the minority, and so our miners are continually reorganized, right? And So one answer to that is to hard code in a rule that says, you know, our blocks will not accept any, you know, coin-based rewards going to a particular address, the IFP address, right? So now, since we actively reject the IFP blocks as invalid, the forks separate relatively cleanly, right? But yes, from a philosophical perspective, the problem with that is that now we've blacklisted an address in the blockchain, right? And it proves that we can do that, right? Whereas an argument, obviously blacklisting addresses would undermine the idea of Bitcoin that Roger so commonly says, where it's an unstoppable, uninterruptible payment system, right?
It's fungible.
Yes, and it's up, yeah. So it's inherently fungible. All of a sudden, those coins are not fungible with others, and anyone who tries to spend out of those, that address will be blocked, right? So our answer to that has always been, well, Bitcoin is mined, Bitcoin Cash is mined all over the place, all over the world with multiple clients. It's utterly impossible to organize, this pile of cats, right? To manage to blacklist an address. Now, if we turn around and do it, right, then I think someday governments are going to come knocking on our door and say, hey, you did it then, so you can do it now.
Right, here's this list of
Right?
addresses that we don't approve of. Please
Yeah, please blacklist these, just like you did 2 years ago, right? For the IFP. So I think that blacklisting addresses is unnecessary, right? Definitely an option of last resort. And I think it's unnecessary compared to simpler moves like just telling everyone, here's an announcement, right? If IFP has the majority hash power, we simply announce, invalidate the block with this hash, and everyone move off onto this chain, right? And then sort of from the IFP perspective, it becomes a very interesting sort of scenario for them, because they could sort of forcibly attempt to push us back into the one and only BCH, right? By giving up their IFP chain and reorganizing onto ours, right? A little bit higher. In that case, we simply invalidate another block, right? And every time that we do that, the IFP miners lose money. So that can only go on for so long before they give up. My feeling is they won't even try, right? And so by using invalidate block, we'll have a clean split.
Right, and I think there's extra points to this. A lot of people simplify it down to, oh, the miners can do this or the miners could do that, but there's a lot of extra externalities. For example, let's say BitPay just gets sick of having to deal with all the issues caused by the BCH network. They could simply go, okay, no more BCH services provided by BitPay anymore. Exchanges could simply refuse to use BCH, or they could, take a more minor stance and just say, you have to increase the confirmation times by 4 times what it would normally take. All of these things harm BCH, significantly. So the cost is actually higher than just, okay, miners may lose some blocks or, this or that. There's actually a lot of negative things that can happen that aren't taken into account by just looking at miners.
Absolutely. Like any sort of fork like this will have significant ramifications in the ecosystem. I always hope that exchanges love to complain, but they actually also love to make money on forks. So, I think that at least from an exchange perspective, that's maybe more of a paper tiger problem. And maybe I know exchanges sometimes get paid for listing coins, so that might be why they posture in that direction. But, your point about BitPay is really important, right? I mean, BCH in the marketplace has not been succeeding, and but we are in BitPay, so we are, at least in theory, fulfilling our mandate as having the ability to become worldwide peer-to-peer cash, right? And one of the key things that we need to do to make that happen is allow you to spend Bitcoin Cash, right? BitPay is a huge partner, right, in the ability to spend cryptocurrencies, because realistically right now, that is how, these payment processors is how it's possible to spend the coin. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I'm
you're
shopping
absolutely
online,
right. That's the
yeah,
danger.
BitPay. When I'm shopping online, BitPay tends to be the service that is available at a shop where you can pay in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash is obviously also included in all those shops.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, maybe if we move ahead to what if scenario. So there's obviously, like we said earlier, there seems to be a set of things that can plausibly happen. One being that ABC gets full majority, everyone else of the hash power, and there's nothing left for anyone else. That seems unlikely to me, but that's obviously a possible scenario. Then
But
there's
even if that happens, it's important that listeners understand that Bitcoin Unlimited will be going our own way at that point.
I think a lot
I'm
of
not
people
quite
will
sure what
be
that's going to look
right.
like, but we are not going to be party to a IFP based coin.
Okay, I think that that's important to point out. I think a lot of people are in the same position of that. A lot of the ecosystem agrees with that
I
stance.
think so.
Yeah. So I mean, the other scenario is that there's some amount of hash rate on either, on both, and let's say ABC still gets the majority, and then the other clients, including BU, BCHN, have a minority of that hash power. Realistically, that's probably not hugely different to scenario A, where ABC gets 100% of the hash rate. I mean, maybe you can tell me your thoughts on that. What
Well,
that would be.
yeah, in these cases, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Bitcoin Cash has not been winning in its current form, right? I think, after 3 years, you guys need to recognize that, right? And BU has gotten a lot of flack for example, having our money, leaving our money in Bitcoin, right? But why we did that? Well, we've kind of taken the backseat and been a little bit quiet for the sake of Bitcoin Cash. But I think, people have coming to realizations like, Amari began in Bitcoin Unlimited, right? We knew what was coming. I knew what was coming. And so, I thought it would be 2 years, honestly, not 3. But, this is one of the reasons why, very little money was moved into Bitcoin Cash. It was a lack of confidence in the way things happened, right? And it began 2-3 months into the fork, when items like group tokens were denied, and they were denied. If you want to go back and watch the group tokens video, I think you'll see it with new eyes, right? It sounds like core developers harping on new feature requests, right? So it's not only that kind of feature was denied, but it was the reasons that were given, right? That caused me to lose confidence in, the immediate medium-term future of Bitcoin Cash, right? So post-fork, right, we have the opportunity to make up for several years of bad decisions and misdirection, right? And all that really matters from Bitcoin Unlimited's perspective is how much of the community is going to come, right? Either the majority goes with the IFP, and so we are going to start doing this with a very small coin, right? Or we'll have the majority of the community all together on a non-IFP coin, and at that point, presumably ABC will be on their IFP coin, and what will we do with this coin that we've regained control over, right? And I guess I would ask the community to reevaluate what happened in the last 3 years and why BCH has lost so much value, and reevaluate all the technologies that were denied and pushed aside, and the hatchet jobs that were done on members of the community, including myself and Bitcoin Unlimited, but also other members. Tom Harding is a perfect example. And we need to reassess where we want to go, and we need to go there fast because we lost 3 years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you bring up a good point. Like these are the two scenarios you presented are the most likely possibilities. And as someone who's been involved in Bitcoin Cash since before Bitcoin Cash even existed, really, I think you brought up a good point the other day in private conversation, and I think it summarized the situation really, really well. It was like, if you look at what's going on now, what it is that Bitcoin Cash as an ecosystem or the development teams are working on, it's like a fix of a hack from the beginning. Like it's like how are we in the position where we're not adding new features that add more value, and instead we're actually just working on fixing broken things that shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Yeah, the EDA to the DAA to assert being removed to Grassberg is the perfect example of a last minute hack, and then a fix that that was a hack because like science and research based concerns were ignored, right? To that happening again, right? And I guess another good example is or an example generally of the sort of things that we need to fix is this whole block candidate API that was recently added to BCHN. So what block candidate does is it allows miners it very efficiently transmits blocks to miners because it just communicates the Merkle tree information and not all the transactions. So Bitcoin Unlimited had this technology like 2 years ago. We deployed it. And now BCHN has deployed the technology. And Bitcoin ABC recently opened up a PR that has the same technology, right? So we've got 3 different implementations of the same technology. Now, I think in terms of BU and BCHN, it was just an unfortunate miscommunication in that we had no idea that they were working on that, right? And they would probably, based on other conversations and the fact that they're amenable to other submissions of ours, I think they would have grabbed our stuff. And so I would chalk that interaction up to growing pains. However, the ABC team absolutely knew about the block candidate stuff that BU was doing because I contacted them personally. And it just didn't happen, and now it's being sort of implemented separately. So we have 3 separate implementations. Now, just the icing on the cake for this example is the Bitcoin Unlimited technology. It hasn't died with Bitcoin Unlimited, right? It's actually deployed in Bitcoin SV, right? So we originally deployed this before the fork, right? And then so they were aware of it, BSV, and they took it on and made it their own. And I'm pretty sure that it is what they use all the time to produce their very large blocks. I know that it was deployed maybe a year and a half ago, right? So how did that happen, right? So these are the sort of things that we need to work on fixing.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's just an example of a dysfunctional development structure at the moment, that if all development teams are working in parallel but not in a way to speed up things, but everyone's just doing the same thing in their own version, then I mean, to me that seems to say that there's been a lack of cooperation. And from me speaking to developers, it's not because developers don't want to cooperate, it's because the lead implementation, who ultimately are the ones that had the biggest say in the past, at least had the biggest say in what actually was implemented at protocol level, refused to accept anyone else's work. And so everyone was left just spinning their wheels in a way, because nothing was getting implemented. And
yes, and remember though, the worst part is this isn't in parallel, right? like BU did it first. Now BCHN it has completed, and now ABC has an open PR, right? So it's in fact a serial reimplementation 3 times, right? And just to recall, when BU originally produced its X-thin blocks, right? The core team subsequently ran off and produced compact blocks, which is a complete reimplementation of something extremely similar, and it has a few kind of 1+s maybe, right? But instead of working off of a common code base, so I suppose this is how the politics can negatively impact the engineering, but we need to not do that, right? And core needed to not do that. It needed to keep everything together. It needed to not let the politics impact the engineering, and to realize that a reasonable block size increase would not have had any effect on the network from an engineering perspective.
I mean, I suppose this is where development and engineering gets into governance, because from what I've seen, it seems to be the reason why this happens. The reason why it happened with Core, for example, was because Core did not want to give any credence to the idea that Bitcoin Unlimited had any kind of competence or any value that they could add to the network.
Exactly.
And this seems to be occurring again. And the only reason why that would occur is because, if you do give credence to the fact that Bitcoin Unlimited would be useful, or any development team, then you've given away some power, you've given away some influence
and
to control what's happening.
Politics is informing the engineering, right? And that is a recipe for a failure right there. The politics inform the engineering, right? And core, from a cryptocurrency perspective, it's not failing, right? Because it has the first mover advantage, and CNBC reports the prices and everything, and any Wall Street guy just says Bitcoin, right? But from a development perspective, as we look at Lightning and so forth, I think we can definitely understand how it's failing.
Right, and I wouldn't say that Core have been successful. I would say Satoshi's design was so effective from day one that it has still managed to not fall apart to this day, and has managed to remain like the #1 cryptocurrency without any additional features.
Thank you. That's a much better way of putting it. Erase what I just said.
But it's true that I genuinely do believe that the core design,
They're coasting on momentum.
Right,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Now BCH, we didn't have that momentum. So when we started doing the same thing, right, when politics informed engineering, and let me just point out, group tokens, right? This was, it was essential to produce tokens rapidly in early 2017 or whenever, because that is when the big token explosion was happening, right? And that would have been a Bitcoin Unlimited initiative that would have probably been extremely valuable and popular for the industry, right? So,
yeah, I mean, I think
we sometimes joke in BU, and this is one of the reasons why we've taken a bit of a backseat, that any technology that BU supports is like, our support is actually like a disenhancement.
Right, it's like a blacklist. I've noticed that.
So if we support a technology, it definitely won't get into ABC, and therefore not into the majority mined hash, right?
Right. I really wish the community would understand that, because I do see people that they seem to be valuable, sensible members that have been around for a long time, since the beginning, and sometimes they'll criticize BU for doing something or not doing, often for not doing something, and they don't see from the internal perspective of BU that doing something actually might be harmful to BCH simply because of that reason. That if BU got involved, then it becomes a political matter. It's often like classed as politicking, and not taking a stance has actually been more helpful for BCH from BU's perspective sometimes.
Yeah. And so we've been working on some infrastructure stuff and kind of quietly building a huge amount of good technologies. But like a good example of what you're talking about is the unconfirmed chain limit depth, right? I mean, this was like such a simple just, a bit of code, right? Just write some code, it's not that hard. And it even like the one of the quality that ABC wanted to preserve uh, to make the code a little bit more complicated is not even a quality that has value in a large block uh, you know, chain,
Paradigm.
right? It has value in a chain that's competing
Hmm.
for block space. So why did it take so many months to get the smallest bump a number? Like 3 years ago, we were like, core, just bump a number, right? Rewind like 6 months, we were like, ABC, just bump a number, for God's sakes. So
Yeah,
anyway, I think through all this, I think all of this stupidity has finally sunk into the community. And I feel like people are changing, right? And so if there's a changing of the guard, what I need people to ask themselves is, it's not enough just to say, oh, the power has left ABC. The question is, what do we want to do with that, right? Because the goal is not to displace any particular person from a position of power. The goal is, or it shouldn't be, because that would be, again, politics informing engineering, right? The goal is, what engineering changes are valuable in BCH to turn this currency around, right? And then what political moves do we need to make that happen? That is, the proper way to think of this stuff to construct a successful, you know, cryptocurrency, or even a company, right? Like I'm coming from startup, mentality, right? And the
yeah, of
engineering
course.
comes first, right? And then, you can sort of go into the politics.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, it's almost there's something before engineering, which is you have to make a product that fits the market. You have to make something that people actually want to use. If you're not doing that,
Absolutely.
then there's no point in working on what you're working on.
Yeah. So I should qualify that. Yeah. The engineering statement, and say, look, you know, we did a lot of hard forks in the last 3 years with, you know, um, a, Bitcoin Cash, right? And all these hard forks, like there were a lot of cleanup, right? I mean, this, stuff is so cleaned up that like, SegWit works better, and Lightning would work better on Bitcoin Cash than it would on Bitcoin, right? Well, what was the point of all that cleanup? I'm not saying that cleanup is bad. Cleanup is good, but if 2.5 years of your goal is cleanup, then you've missed the point, which is, yes, like where you want to bring the currency from an engineering perspective has to be informed by the marketplace, right? And I've looked at and I teach this course at UMass now, and like we teach the Bitcoin blockchain, but above that, the application layers, what can you teach, right? Because like I struggle to give my students an interesting script, right, in Bitcoin Cash, and especially Bitcoin, but even in Bitcoin Cash, because we've only added a few opcodes, right? What interesting scripts are there? Well, there's barely any. Because there are barely any interesting scripts, we don't have very good programming languages, because why write a programming language if your underlying vocabulary is so limited? So this kind of adds, all it kind of adds up to, to a whole lot of nothing, right? And so we spend a lot of time, programming Ethereum, right? Like I'm like a Bitcoin Cash guy, and in my course, I teach Ethereum programming a lot, right? Why? Well, because Ethereum is where the programming's at, right? So, my vision, and I articulated this years ago, right after the fork, is to have worldwide peer-to-peer currency that connects into smart contract, facilities and tokens to enhance the value of, the fundamental native crypto, and to make it more liquid, more exchangeable, more versatile, right? Uh, and I think that is a very important niche. Whereas if you look at Ethereum, they're more like, well, it's a distributed computer. And by the way, you can use that computer to implement tokens, right? Or to implement something else. And, they don't quite have sound money. And so, their ETH token is not quite as strong of a candidate as a worldwide, you know, money, right? So I see these as two separate niches, and I think that Bitcoin Cash needs to get to, worldwide money with smart contracting and token capabilities, uh, and that plays nicely against Ethereum's, um, worldwide distributed computer with, you know, a means of payment and uh, really good smart contracts.
Right, and I mean, I think we're getting into the future part now, like where
Yes, yes.
where Bitcoin Cash can go in the future, assuming we solve the immediate problems right now. You know, what is the direction it should go in? And maybe to kind of clarify, I'll ask you to clarify your statement about getting smart contracts on Bitcoin Cash. So I mean, I remember early on in Bitcoin, it was always considered to be programmable money. Like that was how it was sold to people. That was what people were excited about.
Absolutely.
And it obviously then ultimately turned out to just be people were happy that the price was going up and didn't really care too much about anything else. I still feel like there's a lot of people in Bitcoin Cash that would like that aspect. But when you say, having smart contracts on BCH, I assume you don't mean to be the same as Ethereum in that it's Turing complete. It would be a more efficient
No.
version in that it would have a specific set of functions that it could that has as options.
Right. So yeah, so we would, be really good at efficient transfer of money, right? And, we would be okay at smart contracts, but since it's not Turing complete and so forth, there would be limitations compared to Ethereum, right? Um, so that's why I'm saying these are actually two different niches. And one of the key features, so like you could like throw out the whole Bitcoin scripting language and everything. That would be a radical change, right? Well, and it has been proposed, but what we actually need are just a few pieces of functionality that would enable all kinds of awesome stuff, right? One of the key ones is transaction introspection, right? Like a contract needs to be able, like a script needs to be able to look at the contents of the transaction that is trying to be spent. It's not capable of doing that now. It'd be like write a program that can't read your own memory, right? What kind of program can I write? All it can read are the registers, right? You can't write very much if you can't ask questions about the very transaction that you're involved in. And so,
So just to simplify, it would be like a contract, a transaction that looks at another transaction and says, if this transaction does this, then do that.
no, doesn't even need to look at another transaction. Like
Oh,
right
okay.
now, so there's so in the group tokens proposal at the very end, which no one probably read, I proposed something called op push tx state, right? And that's op push tx data. And actually that's kind of probably been independently, but maybe somehow taken up by another effort that calls it op push state. Okay, and what this simply does is it takes some piece of information from the transaction, the current transaction, and it puts it on the stack for manipulation and testing. So not even some other transaction. So if you allowed one transaction to access arbitrary data from another transaction, that would actually entail a bit of a loss of efficiency, right? Because you would have to look up arbitrary transactions anywhere on the blockchain, right? This is the sort of thing that Ethereum can do. I'm not talking about that at all, right?
Okay.
I'm talking about, can you just read the information of your own transaction? It's that simple, right? Like let's say you want to implement something that says, for every token transaction that happens, make sure that a certain amount of money is sent to this particular address, right? It's like, it's like whoever is offering the token wants to skim a little bit off the top of for any transaction, right? You can't do that in Bitcoin Cash because you can't ask that question because you can't look at your own transaction. So op push transaction state would simply just allow a script to look at its own data.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean,
So
yeah,
all the
obviously
information is right there, right?
we got into
And
obviously the specifics there, but I mean, so it does seem to be that, you know, there's something that Bitcoin Cash is not offering right now. I mean, you could argue that the constant instability and the constant drama is pushing people away, but it does seem to be something more than that. It's just not.
yeah, so just for complete disclosure, so no one like pokes at me, with the op CDS/DSV, the data, check data sig or data sig verify that I originally proposed like 3 years ago, you can kind of twist that around and you can get some, you can access some transaction data through a clever hack, which almost just proves the viability. But I mean, it's extremely inefficient to do that because you're doing signature checks in order just to get data from the transaction. And also it's complicated, and, and that opens up sort of the last sort of two things to make this thing into a, a real language that can do smart contracts is we need to just allow you to have longer scripts, right? Currently in, P to SH script length is limited by the size of the stack. So you can have like 1,000 bytes, right? That's not very long of a program, right? And then the second thing that the final thing that we would need is effectively what was introduced to the Bitcoin world as covenants. But the idea is simply that you need to be able to draw a fence around some BCH and say, okay, while that BCH or token is in that fence, then an additional set of constraints as an additional program is run by the person who created the fence, right, to validate as part of the validation process, right? Again, what's interesting about op group is that the reason why I didn't call it op token is that you can actually put that like a token is kind of like you're putting a fence around something, but you're also creating a new items, right? So what op group does let you do is you can also put that fence around BCH as well. And so you can add a group constraint script that would be run as part of the transaction acceptance for every transaction that uses the group. So if you have those three elements, then you have pretty much the core of smart contracts. And then all you need to do is start thinking about, do we really have like enough opcodes, or should we have like large number opcodes, or, other sort of more versatile things like that.
Is that something for efficiency? So for things that you could maybe already do, but it's just done in a very efficient way right now because you'd have to use a lot of other opcodes to make it work, or is it something you
No,
just
there's
simply
no
cannot do?
way. Well, maybe with again with the op DSV hack, you might be able to do a very limited form of covenants, but certainly not the sort of thing that I'm talking about. And you would spend all of your time implementing the basic covenant logic, and not, the actual covenant that you're trying to enforce, right? So you'd have to have a PhD in this field, and you'd run into all kinds of limitations, right? So part of what I think that we should do is um, create opcodes for the stuff, the fundamental stuff that is going to be used all the time, so that it can be implemented very efficiently, right?
Yeah, that
um,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, another observation would be just to allow large numbers, right? How big? Well, let's make them real big. Let's make them, the current size of the stack, so up to 4,096 bits, right? Why do we do that? Well, Ethereum only has one number size, which is up to 256 bits, right? So if you want to do some more, advanced cryptographic operations in Ethereum, you need to, create and use libraries that construct 1,024-bit or 2,048-bit numbers out of 256-bit numbers, right? So, one way to become popular is to hop technology, right? So instead of creating 64-bit big num or 128-bit big num or 256-bit big num, we should hop that technology and go straight up to, very large numbers.
Yeah, I think this is all very,
Just
very
thought.
interesting. I mean, it's kind of above my head, to be honest. I'd really be interested in hearing a discussion from developers into, what the potential possibilities are with this kind of thing. So
Well, yeah, I mean, to think about big nums, what are the possibilities? It is to some degree just sort of like a fundamental infrastructure like thing, right? Hey, we should be able to multiply numbers, right? We should be able to add. But ultimately what you're talking about is the ability to implement signature schemes that aren't native to Bitcoin Cash on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And so why would you want to do that? Like, as you were saying, we should connect this directly to customer experience, right? Or user experience. Well, in theory, then you could, send money to, some other form of identity, right? Like a GPG, public key or something with a custom script that does that signature validation, in Bitcoin Cash, right? And if we had that too, like the pressure to hard fork new features, I think would be dramatically reduced, because it is implementable in Bitcoin Cash. It might just be inefficient, right? So one other observation for people who, and what I think that we should do is, implement this fundamental stuff and then sort of be done for a while, right? And then let applications start to emerge that might have a relatively large script at first, and then if such an application becomes very popular, then we might think of somehow like optimizing the 3,000 lines of Bitcoin script opcode into one new opcode, right? That maybe does a different enables a different signature algorithm or something.
right, I
But the
mean,
idea is, mhm, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, yeah. I mean, that's basic validated learning. You do a test, you provide a function, see if people use it. If they use it, then you go more in that direction. If they don't use it, then you obviously don't go any further in that direction. It's how
Exactly.
you find new users or new use cases that people care about.
Yes, but without someone's ability to implement that in Bitcoin Cash, right? Without this broad base of functionality, um, the end result is how can you prove a technology? And the answer is the only way you can prove a technology, so at least in the last 3 years, so that Bitcoin Cash would accept it, is by creating an altcoin, right? A competitive coin that therefore would then be successful, right? Because if someone's just going to look at your story, like I just created a nice story, right? But who knows if it will actually ever happen, if someone will want to use a GPG public key to send money, right? We don't know. We cannot know unless a developer goes off and creates an altcoin to do that, right? But by the time that happens, and if they're successful, then we decide, okay, well, I guess we will, accept, that functionality in Bitcoin Cash. It's too late. There's an altcoin out there that does it, right?
Well, or
And this is probably
plus,
what happened with Ethereum,
yeah.
right?
I was just gonna say, plus, like, often it never gets implemented anyway. I remember this argument was given back
It's too
in the
late.
early days of Bitcoin that, if some other currency goes and does something that does really well, we can just copy that and implement it in Bitcoin. But that never ever happened for any function, as far as I'm aware. Maybe some like smaller things, but no feature was adopted like
No,
that.
and because by the time you've proven it, the other coin has the market share, right? And I think, that's sort of what happened with Ethereum and Bitcoin Core, right? Oh, if Ethereum proves that smart contracts are viable, then, we'll add it in, right? Where is it? It's never going to be added in,
No,
you know?
because you have to
Yeah,
differentiate yourself at that point. So you can't
exactly.
differentiate yourself by just copying what some
It's
other
too
currency is
late.
doing.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so what if we could create that fence around some BCH and then say, okay, here's some experimental opcodes, and they only work if you're inside the fence, right? Then in that case, if there's a bug in those opcodes, you can only steal the money that's in the fence because you can only use the opcodes for anything in the fence. So that would be, for example, a simple way to experimentally add opcodes. And by the way, you can then, if you wanted to, if an opcode turned out to be not popular and you wanted to retire it, well, you know, if it like you can tell whether you can tell how much BCH is inside a fence, right? Because that's a part of the public record. So you can tell whether an opcode is retirable or not. So that would be a simple way to allow opcodes or experimental technologies inside the Bitcoin blockchain. So you wouldn't have to create an altcoin to prove a technology.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that about opcodes. Yeah, I mean, I think opcodes is quite a big subject. I think BCHN
I
is
think
going to
this is the first
relook at it.
time anyone's ever mentioned that little feature of like.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of that. So I mean,
No.
it would be great to do a video, maybe some point in the future, to actually dive a bit deeper into what the technology allows.
Yeah.
How we can actually potentially maybe get that implemented at some point, especially if the other development teams are also open to that. I know BCHN are going to like revisit it soon, I believe, to look at op group.
I don't know, but part of the reason why I'm here is because I want to say to people, hey, we got to start thinking about what's next, right? It's like the politics is not the goal, right? The goal is where to bring this currency, and so we need to really start revisiting and thinking about these things. We need to understand where we're going, and I think as like paradoxically, if we hammer this stuff out now, and we all kind of agree where we're going, then we're not going to have these shakeups, every year or two, because everyone who doesn't want to go there will have already left or kind of accepted it, right? Oh well, that feature is not really important to me, but whatever, right? It's not going to harm me. So everyone's kind of accepted the direction, and so then we can all kind of go that way for a couple of years before the next big brouhaha. Anyway,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
my feeling. And as I said, I do feel like if we have this basis of smart contract, a lot of the pressure and therefore the fights will die down, because you'll be able to implement stuff in a smart contract language, right? A pseudo smart contract language, that you would. So a lot of these requests for hard forks and hard fork features will be implementable, above the protocol layer, effectively.
Yeah, which is better, because then it's more permissionless. People can just implement that, test how it goes, and then obviously everyone gets to see whether that was a valuable function that they created.
Yeah, so we essentially need to deploy permissionless abilities within the Bitcoin Cash blockchain, right? Like obviously, the mining process is inherently permissioned, right? But we need to both simulate the permissionless aspects of uh, engineering, because that is what sort of society realizes is the most efficient way to innovate, right? And also in the areas where we know, hey, if we deploy this, then Bitcoin Cash will become more permissionless. We need to go towards those features.
Right, and I
That's
think
my impression.
I think it's also the main thing that brings in new developers into the ecosystem. I think it's probably the main reason why Ethereum seems to have the bulk of developers going to it, is because of the large number of capabilities that can be programmed permissionlessly. Like you can just go and create a company and make any function you want. Obviously, that comes with downsides. Ethereum is, it seems to be not particularly scalable, which is causing them problems right now. Whereas obviously, if you had a specific set of functions that are highly useful on BCH, then you could get, let's say, 90%, 95% of the benefit of having lots of capabilities without the significant scaling downsides.
Yeah, I mean, there are aspects of the way. So people should understand that I'm not talking about turning BCH into something that's as unscalable as Ethereum, right?
Mm-hmm.
The core architecture of the Bitcoin family of blockchains, which we call sort of the UTXO architecture, what it basically does is a transaction imports all of the state that it's going to use in the form of, spending prior transaction outputs, right? And that imported state needs to be there to validate that the payment is good, and that would be the only state that a smart contract can access. And so it would be just as efficient as it is today, which would be much more efficient than Ethereum, where a smart contract can access any contract, any state of any contract, anywhere in the blockchain at any time, right? Which creates this. Well, I mean, heck, no one's probably tried it, but you could probably write like other than the gas issue, you could write like a DOS attack against Ethereum where you're just sucking contracts in from, all over the Ethereum blockchain, right? At any time, and create one contract that just, hits, so much disk on Ethereum, right? That it would be insane. Whereas in Bitcoin, the UTXO, situation means that, hey, we know upfront all the state, we can just gather it all together, pull it in, right? And then run the script. And then once the script is run with that state, then we never have to rerun that script, because so long as that UTXO state is unspent, we know that the script will succeed. So you only need to run the scripts once. Whereas in
Okay, yeah, that's a
Ethereum,
really interesting point.
yeah, in Ethereum, like you can reach out and change state. And so then if state has been changed by one transaction, you need to run the other subsequent transactions to make sure it doesn't touch that previous state, right?
Right, I see. Yeah, that
So
makes
yeah,
sense. I mean, go ahead, sorry.
so it will be more like smart contracts and Bitcoin Cash will be much more efficient, right? Now it will also be a less natural programming interface, right? It won't be like if you programmed Ethereum, you're practically programming like JavaScript, right? With a few caveats. It's not going to ever be like that using this UTX model. We can make it a lot easier than it is today. It's never going to be quite the same, because you got to gather all that state right at the beginning, effectively define it, and then access it. And so it's never going to be as simple or as natural as Ethereum, but I think, and so that's why I'm saying, well, Bitcoin Cash will have a different niche. It will be peer-to-peer money. And then, by the way, there's, it's a little more painful than Ethereum, but you can do all this awesome smart contracting stuff, right? Different niche.
Well, I mean, I suppose, okay, maybe I understand, like it's a different way of programming, but at the same time, because there's a limited set of things that can be done in that way, it is also simpler, because you know what is capable of. Sure, you can't just write, like you say, like a JavaScript like set of code, but services could be built that standardize a set of functions that are used regularly, and there's just a set contract template, for example, for producing contracts like that. And that obviously makes
Definitely.
things much simpler.
And I find that exciting, right? Is like how, like, I would love to get all this infrastructure done so I can ask myself, like, what is the most efficient way to carry state, through multiple transactions, over a covenant, right? So basically, every transaction would need to grab that state as an input and then create like a small, output that contains, the next state, right? And then the next transaction sucks, that state in, and it transforms it and it pushes it out, right? And so you could just, like your knee-jerk reaction would be just to, if you have an integer and a string, you just throw that into, into the transaction somewhere. But what I really think you want to do is something like, create a hash of that data, and you want to post the hash onto the blockchain, right? And so then you're kind of offloading the manipulation and the storage of the state to those people who are interested in that state, right? And all the contract does is validate that, the hash, you supply, when you spend next, you supply the data, and then the contract validates that the hash of the data matches the hash in the blockchain. So all that stuff, and we could create libraries to do all that, right? And I think, it's just an open question as to how awesome we could make Bitcoin Cash scripting, right, using this model. But as it is right now, we can't even take the first step.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think this kind of brings us back quite well to how to put it, like to maybe summarize what you were saying there. It really is, how do we make Bitcoin Cash awesome? Because right now we haven't done enough over the last 3 years. What do we do right now to actually get back on track and do the things that genuinely do make Bitcoin Cash awesome and make people want to use it? How do we bring developers into or encourage developers to join the ecosystem and start building cool stuff? Because that hasn't been happening. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, the governance is obviously one of the things that needs fixing, that, like you pointed out, and the other thing is technology. Can you make Bitcoin Cash useful for people? So yeah, I mean, to kind of wrap things up here, I think this has kind of got to the crux of where we are. Like, what would you say that Bitcoin Cash, to kind of summarize, what would you say Bitcoin Cash needs to do from here, like right now? Is it simply to support the development teams that are trying to push Bitcoin Cash forward? Is it what would you suggest?
Well, I think that we need to decide where we're going, right, as a community. And I think that where we're going needs to be something that will be competitive in the marketplace. And when I first proposed this, people said, all we need is money, right? Well, I think that's been proven after 3 years of declining price to be untrue, right? We need the best programmable digital money that we can possibly create. And so we need to decide what that is, right? And get that nailed down so that there's no, for the next 5 years, say 3 years, there's going to be no further fights about this technology or that technology or what, because we all know where we're going, right? And so then we can all work to get there, and we can do so in a more distributed fashion. One person can work on one thing, another person can work on another, right? And if we do that properly, I think the governance will actually take a back seat, because people will say, oh, look, BU created this technology. Oh, well, that's kind of, where we're going. That's what we wanted. So let me just evaluate it for, security and safety, and then I'm going to deploy, right? Not like, oh, we shouldn't even do that, right? And that's where we should or shouldn't do something, is when the politics come in. So I think that we need to hammer out a vision, BU, I don't know, relative, either a document will be released or has been released that lays out my ideas of what that vision could be. We need to hammer out that vision, agree on it. If people don't agree, maybe they need to go their own way, right? And then we can take who's left and move this currency into something that is incredibly competitive in the marketplace and allows permissionless innovation on top, re-attract developers, and then win.
I think that's an excellent summary of of what could potentially be like a winning strategy for BCH going forward. Yeah, we really need to get all the developers back on a call that ideally isn't now managed by Bitcoin ABC, because most of the development calls were, or the future of Bitcoin Cash. So it would be ideal to get everyone together to try and hash out that vision, that strategy for BCH going forward. So hopefully that's something that happens soon. So yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining me and giving me all your thoughts on, or giving everyone all your thoughts on, how you see the current situation and how we can actually get out of it and start, making a much more significant impact with BCH. So I'm sure we'll have another. Yeah, no problem. I'm sure we'll have another call, sometimes shortly in the future.
Yep.
So to everyone that's watching, this is going to be out on YouTube, so please subscribe to the BU podcast, like the video, put comments down below. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? There'll be more videos out like this soon. So yeah, thanks again, Andrew, and thanks to everyone for watching.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.